What led us to have a war in the first place? Many times I heard people describe, even including myself, describe the war as a senseless war.
Some people generally refer to it as a senseless war. We may disagree with the methods and the motives for the war, but there were underlying reasons.
The TRC report, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, I would recommend that all Sierra Leoneans should try and read the section which deals with the antecedents to the war. What is it that led to the war that we went through? It was 11 years. 11 years civil war. What led us to that war?
Welcome to Honestly Speaking, the podcast where we have honest conversations about the issues shaping our lives. I am Antonia Howard, a journalist, a creative storyteller, and your host. This episode is a special one to commemorate January 18, which marks the official end of the war in Sierra Leone. The day has been declared National Remembrance Day, as recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2004. This is part 2 of our special Remembrance series. In part 1, I spent time at the Residual Special Court for Sierra Leone and the Peace Museum, listening to how memory is held and why remembrance was one of the key recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Because remembrance is not just about the past, it's also about how we carry memory forward.
We ought to make intentional effort into making sure that the next generation of Sierra Leoneans understand their past in order to prepare them for future leadership. If we don't do that, they won't understand the question that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission really grappled with. How did a peaceful country such as Sierra Leone descend into a violent conflict nearly 30 years after independence?
That question doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to a generation that lived through it, watched it unfold, tried to make sense of it as it happened. Hannah Fullah and Dr. Julius Spencer were working in the media at the time, using radio to counter fear, misinformation, and silence. Professor Alie was documenting the country's history, trying to trace the roots of what was happening. I bring them into the conversation, not to relive the war, but to interrogate it.
What led us to have a war in the first place? Many times I heard people describe, even including myself, describe the war as a senseless war. We described it as a senseless war. But what we fail to understand is that it was senseless to an extent, but at the same time, there was a justification.
Some people generally refer to it as a senseless war. I don't quite agree with that explanation. We may disagree with the methods and the motives for the war, but there were underlying reasons.
So if the war wasn't senseless, then the question becomes harder. Why are those reasons still so poorly understood? Why, after all these years, do we struggle to identify and name them clearly?
The TRC report, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, the vast majority of Sierra Leoneans have paid little or no attention to it. I would recommend that all Sierra Leoneans should try and read this section which deals with the antecedents to the war. What is it that led to the war that we went through? It was 11 years. 11 years civil war. What led us to that war? Because those of us who lived through that period and also have read the TRC report can see signs of similar things happening. And what frightens some of us is that if the Sierra Leonean, the average Sierra Leonean is not aware of these things and don't take them seriously, we may end up where we were so many years ago.
Listening to Dr. Spencer, I'm reminded again of the question Joseph Kaifala raised in the museum. How did a country like Sierra Leone descend into such brutal conflict just 30 years after independence? It's a question about systems, about leadership, about what happens when voices are ignored for too long. To answer it properly, we have to step back.
We need to know that the war did not actually begin with Foday Sankoh and others. Students had been agitating for long. This war did not start overnight. It was as a result of accumulated grievances that finally, sparked in March 1991. I go back to independence, although of course the TRC records indicate that in fact the sources of the war could be traced from the colonial period right through 1991. But basically three things. When we had independence in 1961, this was built on three principles: unity, freedom, and justice. And my argument is that if we had religiously followed those, we could not probably have been where we were in 1991. You talk of unity in diversity. This is a multi-ethnic society. But if we embrace the principle of unity in diversity, where everybody is treated equally regardless of their position in society, we would have had misunderstandings, but could not have degenerated into a war. You talk about freedom, where everybody enjoys their fundamental rights and freedoms. And of course, justice. For everybody, justice in the courts, economic justice, social justice, principle of inclusion. If we had religiously really followed those three principles, unity, freedom, and justice, we may not have had the kind of war we had. This is not to say we could not have had a war. Not a fortune teller. But the magnitude, the atrocities committed could not have degenerated to that level. Let's not forget that some of the young people who took part in this war killed their teachers. They burnt schools. Why did they do that? Why did they do that? Is it because they perceived injustice, inequality, or social exclusion? They had access to grind with either the state institutions or even with individuals. So there were really some fundamental causes of the war which were not addressed until we had the war and even after the war.
Professor Alie speaks about history as accumulation, how conflict builds when conditions are left unresolved. Today, many young people did not live this history. We inherited it. And that gap between experience and understanding carries its own risks.
Anybody who is below 30 years does not know exactly what happened, what transpired. If he or she had been born, they were kids, babies or something. What we went through during that period, the war which started in Bumaru in 1991, spread to Freetown, the invasion of Freetown in 1999, what some of us experienced and saw, the vast majority of Sierra Leoneans did not experience it. The current young people, even the Kush crisis we're having now, the drug addiction crisis, is partly related to the war period. The way drugs were abused and misused, it is having an effect today. The post-traumatic stress that many Sierra Leoneans went through that we have really done nothing to address is affecting us today. But most people don't think about it.
Let's not forget that before that rebel war started, we had a serious problem in this country where the school system collapsed, which put a lot of young people out of school. And these ones gravitated toward the mining area, the so-called Sansan boys. And these were the first recruits. These were the first people that the rebels recruited. These were young people who did not believe in the system, who felt that they had no future in the system. So they are easily attracted by promises, you know. And we still have a large cohort of those, particularly in the urban centers. And so this is a very important segment of the population that we need to address.
A lot of young people now there's a disconnect. So the young people can easily be used. I think we had some incidents that happened in recent times where young people were used because there's a disconnect. But then have the things that caused the war gone away? Have we tried to address those issues? So there will always be a justification for people to do things that lead to war or to anarchy because we still have refused to learn the lessons of the war. And a lot of times in war, the young people are the ones who are victims because they use them as child combatants and they perpetrate atrocities on their own people, sometimes their own family members. So this is why it's very important that this awareness is there.
Hannah's voice takes us back to a moment when the cost of that disconnect became impossible to ignore.
August 18, student demonstration. Students were killed. Female students were raped.
As a broadcaster, I don't think I had ever cried on live, but Sierra Leone made me cry. That was my first time. I could not help it, when I heard of what had been done to students.
Those who did not know about these things need to be told about them. We need to pay attention to these things so that we recognize what we went through, so that we do not go through them again.
What lessons have been learned, if any? It would appear it's business as usual. We tend to have a very short memory in this country. People still think it can be business as usual when the very things that produced the war have been with us for a very long time. And some are still being perpetuated, unfortunately.
Different voices, different experiences, but the warning is the same. Peace cannot survive on silence. That warning brings me back to Auntie Marie, to the reforms that were recommended after the war.
One of the problems we get, they say, reforms. We don't get the institutions the way they address some of the issues there. When make people as a man go by the war. So what did they do? They say when I get for go set up the reform then they. When I do different institutions there. Like the law reform now one, the judiciary they say for strengthening them. Even the police, they bring one always man, the British man and give you one old man and call her kids bidu. Because when they do the intervention, they give over 200 police officers. Because the party not be there between the civilian and the police. So that made even when they get discretion for say, it's not the fire, they say can say, and they charge you. They make some man go to prison for simple things away, they're able to address them. So when they come, we do the community policing. Then bring in the FSU. The judiciary, I think, will do a lot of things. But then make sure judiciary, make it be strong, make it be objective, make it be fair, make it be free. They put some people free for go to the judiciary. All that day, that's for promote the peace. For let it come, but it's like, we don't have to do more. For let the peace process and this country make the whole matter, because no why? All the children when we talk, they do the work for now, make the work come, then they come back to sender. And it go worse, because now, they're under the social media life. No, so it be, who don't carry age now. But now they say digital. No, so it be. So if you know strengthen, then thing they need for make sure, if you're not able to control them, but you get for make sure people, they make them feel fine. For say, I'm not going to talk this fine, not this is my country. Because 2002 to now, 25 years now, they pass on. If I'm not like, all the people they involved with it, they don't know much about the war. If you look what did happen, increase in lawlessness, increase in drugs, increase in violence. So how to make up for counter anything in there? Now a lot of effort, a lot of resources, both human, money resources, and mentality resources.
Auntie Marie talks about the reforms the TRC recommended, changes meant to repair what was broken and protect what was fragile. Remembrance is one of them.